I've been a part-time lecturer at Warwickshire College for the last 21 years. I really enjoy it there. One of the things that I find most stimulating is some of the unusual questions that we get from the students there. And it was about 15 years ago I was preparing and practicing for my fellowship, and one lad asked me a question, and when he asked me I really didn't know even what he was asking me. I didn't understand at all. And the question he asked was, if you measure around the coronary band from bulb of the heel around to the other bulb of the heel around the coronary band, and then you measure from the point of heel around the foot surface to the other point of heel, you get two completely different measurements. If the horn tubules run parallel from top to bottom, how come the measurement is different at the bottom than it is at the top? It was a while before I actually understood what he meant. I was driving home from college that night and I suddenly thought, oh, yeah, I do understand what he means. I do understand the question. And I sort of fobbed him off with anything I could think of at the time. And as I was driving back, I realized this is what he meant. If you get a flexible tape, measure from the bulbar heel round the coronary band to the other bulbar heel, average foot will be something like 12 inches. However, if you measure around the foot surface, ground surface, from point to heel, round to point to heel, you'll get a completely different measurement, maybe 14 inches. And if the tubules, as we know, run parallel from the top to the bottom, why are they different? Well, I found the first part of the question, I thought, yeah, I can see one reason, but the rest of it still didn't quite come to me. So I've got a round plastic pipe here, not sure how many of you can see it, but I realized that if you cut at right angles to the cylinder, you get one circumference, but if you cut at an oblique angle, then you're going to get a completely different measurement. And when you look at it, it's sort of a little bit like a horse's foot. And so that was definitely part of the solution to his question. However, it was by no means all of it, and it's the next bit that really sort of interested me. That's what we've got, really. The top there is a completely different circumference measurement to the bottom one. So I got home that night and I thought, I'm going to try and make a foot shape out of dried spaghetti. Imagining that the spaghetti was the horn tubules and trying to keep them parallel, trying to make a real live foot shape, and trying to keep the toe parallel to the heel, because that's what we're always taught, that's what all books say, and that's what it definitely should be. But when I tried to do it, I just didn't have any success whatsoever. And what I found was that I could get 2 out of 3, but never get 3 out of 3. So I could either get the front and the back of it parallel, with the sides also parallel, but then I couldn't get a proper foot shape. Or if I tried to get a proper foot shape and pull the sides out, then all the spaghetti splayed out to the bottom and didn't look like horn tubules on a foot at all. So no matter what I did, I couldn't get all 3 to work at the same time. And I was very puzzled. So all textbooks, without exception, tell you that equal loading, fine, no problem with that. But it's that parallel toe and heel that I was starting to think maybe that's not the case in real live feet. I got a lot of textbooks at home. I checked every single one that I had, and without exception, every single book said the same thing. In an ideal foot, in an ideal world, we should have toe and heel parallel. back to that again. So when I actually started looking at feet that we shod at home, well, not necessarily shod, but we worked on, so whether they were trimmed or shod, no matter what they were, I found certain feet were really useful, and Mother Nature had given me reference lines that I could check to see what I was talking about. And when you've got a foot with black and white pigmentation like this one is, you can quite clearly see that the line of the black, I think I got a pointer, yeah, that line there is nowhere near parallel to that line there. And the more feet I looked at, the more obvious it became. And this one had a really nice single black line. I'm not sure if you can see it from back where you are, but there's a perfect black line there which nature had given me to use. And you know, the two lines are just nowhere near parallel. So what was going on? I was definitely confused. Certain feet just had a huge discrepancy. So if we look at that compared to the toe, you can see the tubules here, and that one is vastly different to the toe. So what was I going to do next? Well, I was wanted to take my fellowship, and I just could not think of a good subject to do for my thesis. I was practicing my shoes. I just not long before started teaching at college to help my ability to the lecture in the exam, but just couldn't think of a good subject. This had piqued my interest so much that I thought, this is the way to go. So I had to think of a good way of actually putting some numbers on these things and actually measuring them reasonably accurately so I could put a thesis together and take it forward. The methods I found were not always as scientific as I wanted. By the nature of our job, there's always going to be variables. It depends on how the farrier trims certain feet, and there were other factors which weren't particularly scientific either, which we'll go into now. Measuring toe angles was relatively straightforward. There are quite a few devices out there to measure the toe angle, and that really wasn't too much trouble. I tried to keep it as consistent as I could by always me trimming the feet, but even then, you know, you can dump the toe a bit more sometimes, or you can leave the heels up a little bit more sometimes. So it does vary it does vary, you know, how much you dorsal dress here and how much you take off the heel here, and that does obviously change things. Again, you can see Mother Nature's given us a lovely line here. It's had a coronary band injury at some point, and that line there, you know, that is only a couple of inches back from the toe. That's already nothing like the same angle as the toe. So there's definitely something going on. What I tried to do was to get as much consistency in my trim as possible. I used the top inch here as my guide always, and I just try to carry that angle all the way down to the bottom of the foot and try and keep a nice straight line down the dorsal wall. I like to think I'm reasonably consistent with how much I take my heels down, so I concentrate on that as well, and that gave me the measurement there. For those of you who haven't used a hoof gauge before, I hadn't much, so I was learning as I was going, but you just turn it upside down and you can see you take the read in from that line there. One of the other things that it did, oddly enough, have quite a discrepancy with a lot of textbooks is the common angles that we had in the feet. For fronts, this was a pretty average measurement. You can see it's about between 53 and 54 there. And there were plenty around the 55. There were even up around the 56, 57, and it's sort of more a steep angle than most textbooks tell us. So, managed to get some fairly accurate, good numbers for the toe. However, when it came to the heel measurement, I really was struggling. I asked around, I tried to find any way that people had ever tried measuring heels before, and I just couldn't find anything that anybody had ever done. I've made various models and little devices in my time, but I couldn't come up with anything that sort of fitted in place and gave me an accurate reading. So, in the end, I just went for the obvious option, which was to take digital photographs of the feet and then just draw lines on the digital photograph and use a simple protractor to take the measurement. Obviously, I knew that there were going to be questions asked by my fellowship examiners, which was quite proper and quite right, because it is open to quite a bit of abuse. Well, no, not abuse, mistake. So, if you got the camera here, it's going to give you one measurement. If you've got it over there, it's going to give you a different measurement. If you've got it over here, it's going to give you a different measurement. If the foot's not parallel with the floor, it's going to give you a different measurement. There's quite a few variables there, which I had to try and minimize and just make it as accurately as I could. So we stood each foot on a brick like that, and tried not to manipulate anything, and tried to be quite objective as we could. So this is what we did, and then we just drew lines in the photograph, one at the heel, one across the bottom. Oh, I missed one. And of course we don't need the toe in this one. Yeah. So just those two lines, and took a protractor and measured that angle. The reason I knew I was going to put forward, when I got questioned by the examiners, I had to have an answer, because I knew if they had anything about them, they would ask me this, and it was the first question they asked me. And my answer was that I'm not trying to prove how much of a difference there is between the toe and the heel. I'm not saying that there's 25% difference or anything like that. All I was trying to say was that there is a difference. They are not parallel. So I accepted that there could well be an error of up to 2 or 3 degrees, depending on how I was trimming, where I was photographing from, was it flat on the brick, etc. But I still thought that it was a legitimate way of proving that there is a difference. So that was my way of measuring. I've tried to persuade lots of people over the last 15 years or so about this, but it's really, really, really difficult to do. And one of the mistakes that I realize I make is I don't explain myself very clear at this point. What I'm talking about is not how the foot changes shape when it loads. What I'm talking about is how things change when you go from 2 extremes. So you go from a donkey foot, which is in a lot of ways similar to what we showed here, where the left wall and the right wall, lateral and medial, are parallel to each other. That would be one extreme. So if we go on. So if we look at a donkey foot from in front, very often those 2 walls are actually parallel, which means that you can actually have the toe and heel parallel to each other, because it's going back to what we did with the cylinder. It's just cutting that off there, it's cutting that off there, and we've got the medial and lateral parallel, and we've got the toe and the heel parallel still, because it's part of that cylinder. So that is one extreme. Then I'm talking about what happens when you go from that extreme to something like a an ex-racing thoroughbred with wide flat feet and very different lateral and medial angles. You know, just think very logically, if you're going to pull that wall out there, something has to change. And what changes is the angle of the heel. The heel gets pulled forward. I'll just go back a minute. It's a bit of a funny slide, but I just want to explain why I've got it there. It's a GIF, and it's trying to just show the difference in angle of the wall. So I just want you to look at what we've got here is vertical, and if we pull this out on the next slides, the more we pull that out there, what is going to happen to the heel? Can it stay in the same place? Can it stay the same angle? So this is the model I made, and you can see that the things to look at is we got toe and heel parallel. We've got a marker down the back there just to give us some sort of reference point, and that is, to all intents and purposes, part of a cylinder. However, what happens if we grab hold of that there and we pull that towards us? We're going to grab the bottom of the wall and we're going to pull it to make a more realistic foot shape. Each slide that goes, you can see that is coming out a little bit more, and look what's happening to the heel. Now, that cannot stay at the same angle. Unless you're going to pull the lines apart at the bottom, that heel cannot stay at the same angle. As the wall gets pulled out, that heel has to get pulled under. And also, interestingly, the coronary band gets pulled down as well. But that's taking it to its extreme now. And you can see the difference in the angles there simply by manipulating this wall here, by pulling it out to make a different shaped foot. Then that has to pull forward. It cannot stay in the same place. Yep. So if we just go through it, we just go there, you can just see it moving. You just see that point of heel moving, which changes the angle of the heel. It really is as simple as that. Just, if you haven't quite got it, there's just one other way I thought of showing it. This is obviously a foot shape when you're looking down on it from the top. And so what we're going to do with this one, the toe is going to stay in a fixed place. We're going to grab hold of the quarter and pull the quarter out there. We're going to pull the quarter out there. If that toe stays in the same place, what has to happen to that point of heel? It has to move, doesn't it? If you're keeping that still, you're moving that, then that cannot stay still. So as we take this one forward, you can see the marker where the heel was. And each time you pull the wall out to a more realistic foot shape, then that point of heel moves forward. And it's impossible to have a foot that shape and still have the toe and heel parallel. It is just physically and scientifically impossible. So the more it moves, the more that heel pulls forward. Mesmeric, isn't it? That's me with two black cocktail sticks pulling it apart. Okay, so if we then accept what I have said, what should we do with this? What should we take home from it? The first thing for me is that I don't like taking things as gospel. I had a certain apprentice called Mr. Tom Smith who was very similar. I had to persuade him always that what I was telling him was possibly the right thing. And you must just think about what you read, think about what you hear, and pick out the good bits, because there's often opposing views. Also, I'd be interested if you just looked at your feet that you shoe at home, see what you think. In particular, take notice of the feet that have got different pigmentation. They've got white in the foot, they've got black in the foot, and those are the ones that make it most clear by the different angles. If you can see that there are different angles, I think you should consider whether it's possible or even desirable to achieve that ideal, perfect, well-conformed foot. And I have definitely come to the conclusion that I think we should just accept that the majority of feet have different angles, and that's the only way that science and nature can let them perform properly. This is my last slide, and it was my cover slide on my fellowship thesis. And I picked it because Mother Nature was very, very kind to me here. Basically gave me a nice white line in the toe angle, gave me a nice white line at the heel, and that allowed me to measure both of those and see what the difference is. The other reason I picked this foot is because it's a really strong, upright pony foot. The shoe that's on it there is just a little 5/8, 3/8, about 10 inches of 5/8, 3/8, so you can see how small that foot is. Very strong, very upright. A lot of textbooks say that if you've got a difference in heel and toe angle of more than 5 degrees, then those heels are considered to be underrun. What do you think that toe angle is approximately? Anybody want to have a guess at it? No, I'm all too scared.
52.
Wow, you're the man! Good one, Benson. Nice one. Yeah, okay, do you want to guess the heel one, Ben?
48. No, sorry. Oh,
He was miles out.
that's what I meant.
34. That means there's 18 degrees of difference between that toe and the heel. Yep, textbooks tell us if you've got 5 degrees and they're underrun. It's just utter bollocks. And I will leave you with that comment. Are there any questions?
Well, first of all, I think round of applause for Chris there. That was absolutely fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, just thank you for the lecture. Just,
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree about the heel and the toe angles being different, but when you're talking about the extremes of angles,
Yeah.
you know, like so, say you've got a lot of morphology going on in the foot, and you've got an excessively long toe, that will drag the heel with it.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is, even though those angles aren't running in parallel, if there's a larger variation between the two angles, the hoof generally isn't in good order.
No, I agree with that. I'm just saying I think if you're trying to achieve parallel toe and heel, then that is unrealistic. I'm totally with you to try and improve them, but I don't think you'll ever get them the same.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, one question down the front.
I think there is an aspect to look at, which is the solar angle of the pedal bone.
Okay.
The solar plane angle of the pedal bone should not be parallel to the ground, but rather at 10 to 11 degrees to the ground. Otherwise, you have biomechanic problems. And that decides that the toe angle should be the angle of the actual bone plus the 10 degrees. And that is your deciding factor.
Yeah,
and that brings you to around, depending on the horse, around 55 for the front as the ideal target. And the rest is irrelevant as long as the solar plane of the pedal bone is not parallel to the ground.
Okay, I'm not actually talking about anything that's going on inside the hoof. I'm literally just talking about the external views that we see and what we try to achieve with those external reference points, really.
Yeah, but we should always also think about why we are doing all those things, and that's to achieve the 10 degrees
Yeah.
solar plane.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One at the back over there, Ben.
Sorry, didn't see that. Yeah, coming along. Righty-ho.
Right, I've got a couple. Oh, sorry. Right. Okay, a couple of questions. I do need to read Simon Curtis's hoof wall, so I need to check some of my understandings and assumptions as well. But basically, it sounds to me that we're starting off with a premise that we're assuming that there's an even density of horn tubules all around the circumference of the foot from the coronary band. So I've often seen, or think I see in dissection, that there's a higher density of papillae for the tubules at the front of the coronary band than there is round near the heel. So the analogies that we're trying to use sound to me, from what you're saying, that you're assuming that there's an even density of tubules all the way around. Is that correct, or am I misinterpreting it?
I suppose I don't have the knowledge you have on that certain subject, and I can't answer it, sorry. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Right, and then the second thing that I was considering might be slightly in line with this gentleman here. He was considering the actual foundation of what's under the hoof capsule.
Yeah.
Is that the front obviously is bone, so that's more rigid. So I suppose the distortion potential of tubules is going to be reduced because that's sat on a more fixed platform. Whereas behind the widest part of the foot, that's more cartilage. So is that why we're seeing the greater propensity for distortion there?
Well,
because it's a more malleable foundation.
Possibly, but if you go back to, take me a while to get there, but if you go back to the one where I was using the hoof gauge on, you could see that, sorry, you can see that there's, from there to here, that line is definitely not parallel to the toe there, and that's only just back a little bit from the toe. That's definitely in front of the widest part of the foot, and yet the angles are already starting to change there.
And then the final question I had was, I just found it interesting looking at the alignment of the coronary band on feet that had a greater discrepancy between the toe and the heel. The coronary band seemed to be more domed or falling away sharp.
Yeah, exactly, but that's what the GIF shows, that as the toe, as the quarters pull out, then that coronary band does dip. You can see it coming in quite clearly there. The two go together. Yeah.
Wonderful. Anyone else got a question? Yep.
When you altered the shape of the perimeter hoof with the cocktail sticks and made the toe wider and bolder, the heels came in.
Yeah.
Do you think the bold-toed cross-clip fronts have this effect?
Ooh. I don't put many side clip fronts on, so
for that reason?
I personally do think side clip shoes will alter the shape of feet over time. So I don't particularly like them and don't often put them on. So probably not the best person to ask on that one.
Any last questions? No?
Good.
Well, thank you very much. Another round of applause there for Chris.